And what I want this to do is just kind of animate in. So from, we'll start off from the top and then just drop in, hold, and then drop out. So in order to do that, just like anything else, and you all have been doing this for the whole entire semester basically. Position, P for position, we're going to start here at the initial. Actually, I'm going to go about 15 frames inside my timeline or into my timeline, and I'm going to start at 15 frames in. The text is up here, and then I'm going to take basically 10 frames. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 frames. It moves very quick, and it's going to come down. Let me zoom in on this part. Actually, before I zoom in, I want to adjust my work area so that it only plays this and I don't have to wait for it to play the entire timeline. So this is how it's going to come in. So it's 10 frames, but it still seems kind of slow if you think about it. We're also going to add our easy ease. So Control Shift 9 to add the ease out, and Shift 9 to add the ease in. So I'm using the shortcut keys instead of the actual menu, which you get by right mouse button, over um, the keyframe and going to keyframe assistance. So now if I hit enter, you can see that it drops in and then kind of eases into position. And I'm going to turn the blur on my timeline here so that it mimics the blur. I'm going to hold this for 2 seconds. Well, actually, 2 seconds is very long. I'm just going to hold it for about a second and a half. So if it basically lands at 1 second, 1 frame, I'm just going to go to about 2 seconds, 12 frames, which is roughly 1.5 seconds, just a frame shy of it. And what I'm going to do is at this point, I'm going to insert a keyframe in the position so that it holds the position from the time it lands to the time we're going to start pushing it out from the to the bottom, or it exits from to the bottom. So at this point, so here is my keyframe, and then I'm going to go 10 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and just take that away. Now, what I want to do here is I want to also make sure that it eases out at this time. So I'm going to go keyframe assistant, ease out. And here I'm going to go keyframe assistant, ease in. Just even though we won't see it, it'll give it a little bit more depth. So it goes like that and then falls down. Sometimes when you introduce eases between this keyframe and it holds for a second or more, and then the next keyframe where it's going to start moving, you may get a phenomenon where it kind of moves even though the keyframes are telling it to stay. Why that's happening is because in the graph editor, you may see that this middle part right here is changing, or it's not flat. If it's not flat, that means your um, image is going to move a little bit. So what you may want to do if you see that, is just adjust the handle here, or set the keyframe interpolation to linear. So I'm going to go back here, and if I take this keyframe and this keyframe, shift select it, and right mouse button, go to keyframe interpolation, what that does is it looks at the temporal or the time interpolation and the spatial or the space interpolation. So it looks at the time and space basically. And you want to set that to linear and linear. Once you do that, it's going to change your keyframes a little bit to be linear, and then you can go ahead and apply ease in to that last keyframe, and I'm going to apply a ease out to that last keyframe. So what that does is basically adjust your keyframe so that if it's not holding still in between the time it stops to the time it starts again, it will make it linear, make your line linear so that it will stay in place. There are other ways to do this, but this is kind of a quick workaround. So I'm going to save that, Control S. Now that after Now that this works, what I'm going to do next is introduce the actual title of my sequence or of my animation. So after this goes away, I'm going to have my main title just kind of um, fade in with opacity, and we'll add some blur to it as well. But before I do that, see, after this, I don't need this anymore. So I'm going to split layer by going to the position and then going to edit split layer or Control Shift D. And that extra stuff, I don't need it. That extra segment of this text, we don't need it because we're done with it. All right, and now I'm going to type in my title. Now the title could be a little bit fancy. If it's big enough, it doesn't have to be sans serif. And in this case, my title is going to be The Angry Teenager. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, and we'll go with a nice, well, not a nice, they're all nice fonts, but I'm going to go with, so I'm going to go with this font. And one of the things you really have to worry about is that it takes a long, if you have a lot of fonts like I do, it just takes a while to have your font lists loaded. So just, make sure that you give it a few seconds for it to be loaded. I'm going to go with Futura. I really like this font. And I'm going to change, actually, no, I'm not going to go with Futura. I'm going to go with Futura Bold. And what I'm going to do is adjust the leading so that the words are closer together, make them bigger. Just kind of adjusting it as I go along. And let's make this 100%. And let's make this 100%. Actually, I'm going to make it a little bit taller than it is wider. And you can also adjust the scale. Don't forget that. Scale is different from adjusting the font size. Notice the font size doesn't change if I adjust the scale. So if you adjust the scale differently and you adjust the font size differently, you'll get two different results. Just be aware of that. So anyway, this is as big as it's going to get. And what I want to do now is just have this, as I mentioned, kind of fade in. So I'm going to go to my options here under transform and go to scale and opacity and position and keyframe, those three things. I'm also going to, at this point, change my anchor point for this layer, the Angry Teenager layer, and put it in the middle because I want it to scale uniformly on all sides as I do this. So at this point, this is how it's going to look. And we want to start off with the initial, so initially it's going to be this small, and the opacity is going to be 0. And be sure you have your initial keyframes there. Position, scale, opacity. If you wanted to rotate, of course, you can have rotation too. We'll just add that in there, and I'll rotate it a little bit. And we'll do 10 frames again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 frames. I'm going to change my rotation to 0 so that by the time it appears and it's visible to all of us, it'll stop rotating. I'm going to increase my scale a little bit. And I don't need to change my position, but since I have a keyframe, I'm just going to click on this add a keyframe diamond here. So it'll just give me that keyframe. And of course, I'm going to increase my opacity to 100%. Once you do that, you can test it out. So let's see how it looks. And remember, you're testing as you're going every 2 to 4 seconds on your work area so that you can see the results without playing the whole entire thing. All right, that works for me. And I'm going to select all of these and right mouse and do my keyframe thing so it eases out. And then as it twirls into place, it slowly eases into place with this one. And finally, we'll add the blur. And when you add the blur, make sure that this main blur is on. So that works a lot better. And it spins just enough so that you don't make your audience go crazy. You can really push this number, by the way, the number for your rotation. I'm going to make sure I'm clicking on the arrow just to make sure that I'm right over that first keyframe. You can go nuts with this number and make it spin like 32 times. And that's going to drive your audience insane, and it's going to give them motion sickness and all this other stuff. But see, it's basically spinning into place 32 times. It also takes a long time for the processing to happen. And again, it might look cool, but it doesn't really make sense in terms of what we want the audience to see. And you don't want to drive your audience insane. So just a little bit is enough. So that works. And the final thing I want to show you is effects. You can apply effects to text. The way to apply effects to text, let's say after it comes in, the title, and we hold it, we're at 3 second 11 frames. We want to hold it for roughly 2 seconds. So so at 5 second 12 frames is about 2 seconds. And after that, we want it to, instead of like just going away like we did with the first animation, since this is the title, we want it to go away gracefully or in some really cool other kind of way instead of just kind of the same boring way of spinning in. Again, we have we have a decent way of the title appearing, and we want it to kind of go away with a nice style. But in this case, I want to show you how to use effects and how that works. So if you go to effects and preset panel and just click on, oops, if you click it too much, it's going to do this. So double click it. If you don't see it, click it once. Don't double click it. If you want it to blow up your whole entire screen, then you can double click it and it'll do this. And you have to double click it to send it back. But anyway, we're going to bring this up, the effects preset. Under effects preset, there are some animation presets. That's like the first option. If you click on that, you will see some text options, and we want to go to text. And what they do are basically, these are pre-animated or pre-scripted presets that help to help you change and work with your text. So I don't know, let's go. You can try these out. Some of these are made specifically for introduction and outros. So intros and outros, like this is an intro we created, but you can also do animate in. There are some other options here. If you want to test these out, knock yourselves out. There's a lot to go through, but they're all easy. You can apply it, and also to animate out. So I encourage you to look at those two for text. But what I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to go over to tracking. And what I want to do is just increase the tracking. So basically the texts are going to all not clump away, but they're basically going to do this. Just kind of spread apart as they fade. So I'm going to go to tracking, and I'm going to go to increase tracking, and we'll apply that by clicking on the effect and dragging it into the layer that you want it to apply to. Also, where that tracking is going to start is going to be based on where your time marker is. So we said we wanted to start at 5 second 12 frames. So I'm going to do that. Take my time marker there, and then, or be sure my time marker is there, and then I'm going to apply increased tracking to that spot right there with my cursor. And you'll notice under text now, animator 1, you see this keyframe here, and this is basically what it's doing. And these have some kind of keyframe with some kind of behavior. That's why they kind of look like this hourglass keyframe. They're really kind of like breakdown keyframes, or keyframes with information on it. Well, graphic information. We'll see that here. See how this is easing out and easing in here? That's basically what it is showing, is that these keyframes are not your typical ease in and ease out, but they have some kind of customized easing in on it. That's why they look like this hourglass shape. So don't worry about that. And again, if you want to change that, remember keyframe interpolation, selecting linear will change that. But in this case, we don't want to change that. We just want to take whatever the default is. And we want our transition again to happen really fast. By default, it takes 1 second. Maybe for this one, as it spreads apart, we'll see. Maybe 1 second is good enough. I think it's good enough. So we'll stick with the default and go 1 second. But at the end keyframe here, so if I click my go to next keyframe option here, I'll get right over that end keyframe. I want to increase the tracking behavior by a lot because what I wanted to do is basically this. And at the same time, we'll increase the scale. So I'm going to click on add keyframe for the scale option because remember we scaled it already. So we already have the first keyframes in. And as this is happening, what I wanted to do is just kind of scale, increase the scale. And see how it moves from the center? Maybe I want that G to be in the center. So I'm going to also click on position here to make my add my position keyframe. And as it goes from this one to the end, basically, I just want to move. I'm holding down shift so I don't mess up the, well, you don't have to. You can, if you want to keep it in the center, you don't have to hold down shift, but I just want to move and then hold down shift so it just kind of stays linear and in the same level. And I just want to center it, and now I'll just kind of push it up just a little bit so it stays in the middle. So this is what's happening. And again, add we're gonna add an easing out. So keyframe assistant easy ease out, and we're gonna add ease in towards the end. So we'll get something like this. And I wanted to just quickly fade out. So I'm going to start at the end over here where all these keyframes are. And I'm going to introduce my opacity, add keyframe. So I'm clicking on here, not the, because I already, again, have keyframes here. So I'm not clicking on the stopwatch. I'm clicking on the add or remove keyframe option. I'm going to go 6 frames backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And at that point, I'm just going to start the opacity. So I have opacity at 100% at 6 frames before the animation stops. And then right at the point where all the other keyframes are, where basically my animation stops, I want to put 0. And so now what's happening is this. So again, just a couple of easy, quick things that you can apply just to have really interesting motion graphics applied to your introduction title. Because it's blurring, what I want to do is actually go with that effect and increase the blur. So I'm going to go to my effects and type blur. And we'll see what blurs. We want to really just use the most simple, which is Gaussian blur. You can choose to use the obsolete version, or you can choose the newer version. And we'll go with the newer version. So I'm going to apply Gaussian blur to this layer at that keyframe marker. And you'll find it now under effects. Notice this effects thing just started. And what I'm going to do is basically at the time, basically about halfway into the animation, like right around here, I'm going to add a keyframe by clicking on the stopwatch for my blurriness. I'm going to leave the blur dimensions the same. And then by the time it gets to this point where the fading starts, I'm going to make the blurriness increase. So I'm going to increase the blurriness. See how it's getting blur. You also have the option of horizontal or vertical blur only. I'm going to really push that number. And again, the more you do it, the higher that number is, the more strain it's going to put on your processor and your graphics card. But you can do horizontal or vertical. Let's try horizontal. Let's see what happens. So that's what happens. And let's see how that looks. It kind of happens, in my opinion, a little bit too late. So maybe we'll just start. I'm going to click and drag my keyframe, and we'll just start here as it's changing. That probably looks better. So that's it. and it's shorter. You typically want to keep these intro things shorter than 10 seconds. So this comes in exactly at about 6.5 seconds before it goes away. Remember to give it a few frames. I usually typically give it 10 to 15 frames of start time. So nothing's happening for the first 10 to 15 frames, and then it goes into your animation. So there's a couple of things you can do with your text. In this case, this is actually called the angry teenager, but I want to change it I want to change my text color for just particular text. So just like your word processing options, you can actually, on the text tool, if you go right above the text, notice that the text, when I'm on the text tool, I have a little marquee, a square marquee around it. Now, if I mouse over slowly on top of the text, that marquee goes away, which basically means I can select that text. And you can also do this by clicking on the text layer, going to the text tool and just going right on top of it. The reason I want to point that out is because if you are on the text tool and you click anywhere outside of any text layers, you'll actually end up creating new text layers by mistake. So remember that. And also, just really important, if you wanted to change just only certain parts of the title without creating a new layer, sometimes you have to create a new layer if it's going to move on its own compared to the other text. But in this case, what I want to do is just select the word the, and select the word teenager and change those colors to something else. So I'm going to do the first, the word the. So we'll make this a little darker. And what I want to do also is just copy this code so that I can also apply it here. So the angry teenager. And I'm going to make the word angry because it's angry word quite literally. I'm going to make that red. But be careful not to make it so bright red because it'll look really bad on television or on screen. I'm going to go a little bit beyond just the brightest red you can find. So once I do that, I'm going to just also change the stroke to another color. We'll do something like this, a little bit on the lighter side. So now that I've changed my text colors, I can move on to the next part.